Egypt, and they are confirming that, yes, indeed, there has been some agreement tonight on the first phase of this negotiation and of a potential ceasefire deal. And that first phase, as you just noted from the president's post on his social media page, is that it involves the immediate release of the hostages, the living hostages. And Linsey, 48 Israelis are still in captivity, 20 of them still believed to be alive. And so certainly this news will come as a great bit of relief and very encouraging for the families who have been for the past 2 years praying and enduring really the worst of this ordeal. Now comes the word of an agreement and potentially the thought that they could be reunited with their loved ones perhaps soon. Linsey, at this point, we don't have the timeline. We don't know how quickly all of this might happen. But as you noted in the president's statement again tonight, he said that also they agreed on Israeli troops withdrawing to a certain line. That part of this is important because it would, in theory, allow Hamas to go and try to find where the hostage bodies are and also organize the exchange. So there's a lot of questions still left to be answered on exactly how this is going to play out. But the word we have tonight, Linsey, not only from the U.S. President Trump, but also officials here in this region, is that there has been agreement on the first phase of this ceasefire deal. And certainly this is great news for so many after 2 years of horror.
Certainly a momentous occasion, Marcus. Let's just talk about the significance of this agreement that is more than 2 years in the making.
Well, what we have heard and what we've seen about this agreement is there's agreement across the entire region. So it wasn't just Israel and Hamas officials negotiating, and certainly they're not the only stakeholders in this. You have so many countries across the region. The Qataris playing a key role as mediators, but you also have Turkey and Saudi Arabia and other countries here, leaders who all signed off on this deal. If you recall, days ago when it first came out that President Trump had proposed this 20-point plan for not only a ceasefire but also a hostage exchange, and that there was consensus across the region. So when you put all of this together, when you step back and look at how there is a general consensus, it gives you some sense of really how much people wanted this war or want this war to end. 2 years it has been going on. More than 1,200 people killed in that horrific attack by Hamas here in Israel on October 7th of 2023. And then subsequently you have the war in Gaza, where according to health officials there, the death toll has surpassed 67,000 people, most of them innocent civilians. And so when you consider all of that, how much destruction and death there has been, for there now to be the best sign yet of peace here in the midst of this war is significant.
Marcus Moore for us in Tel Aviv. Marcus, thank you so much. Ian Pannell also joins us now from Israel. As far as we can tell at this point, obviously this is still very early, just minutes now that we've known that this deal is apparently going to go through. Do we have a sense what the agreement is? We know that it was really a red line for Hamas, that they wanted to make sure that the military would move out of the West Bank, would not be in Gaza. What does each side get in return here, at least in this first phase, Ian?
Yeah, Linsey, I think that is the critical question. What did Hamas, what did the Arab and Muslim negotiators get in return? And at the moment, the answer is it's not very clear. Now, the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman posted on social media talking about the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement, which would lead to stopping the war. So releasing of the Israeli hostages and some Palestinian prisoners, around 250 convicted Palestinian prisoners, as well as, we think, hundreds more, including women and children who were detained inside Gaza, and allowing aid to enter. There's also going to be a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces. And I think we have to wait and see to what point do Israeli forces withdraw? What kind of buffer zone do they maintain, and what happens crucially with phase 2 that's supposed to lead to a lasting ceasefire. A temporary ceasefire we've already seen before. The release of hostages we've already seen before, and then eventually that agreement was broken by Israel and they resumed the bombing. So what guarantees do the people of Gaza have that that won't happen? And until that deal is signed and we see the large print and the small print, we just don't know the answer, but we should be asking those questions right now.
Of course, Donald Trump, then candidate, pledged while he was running for president that he would end this war in Gaza. He wrote just at the end of his Truth Social post, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Of course, a line from Scripture. Do we get a sense of who the peacemakers were? We know that in September, when the UN General Assembly met here in New York, that this was forefront of several nations. Many of the leaders from, in particularly in the Middle East, were saying that they were having these side meetings with President Trump. We understand that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, of course, his son-in-law, were involved. Do we have a sense of what really finally seemed to get us across this line?
Yeah, I think the substantial difference here is the coalition that President Trump managed to put together. His exceedingly warm relations with Qatar, I think, have been central to that, but also with President Erdogan of Turkey, as well as Saudi Arabia, as well as the Emirates. All those countries' leaders, and Egypt, of course, have been absolutely instrumental. And when we knew that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were flying into Egypt to Sharm el-Sheikh to take part in this agreement, what I think few people focused on was who the other people were that were going. So it's the head of Turkish intelligence, the head of Egyptian intelligence, the Qatari Prime Minister and the Qatari Foreign Minister. Well, frankly, you don't put those high-level people in the room unless you're fairly confident that you will get a decision. But what you're also seeing that we haven't seen before is pressure on Hamas from the countries with which it had cordial relations at the very least, in particular Turkey and Qatar, both of whom are seen as sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot. And that seems to have been absolutely critical. So for the first time, and we're used to President Trump claiming credit for many, many things, and sometimes that's valuable and sometimes it's not entirely accurate. But on this occasion, he absolutely did put together this enormous coalition of people that rarely agree. And if this comes off, this will be one of the most landmark agreements in this region for decades. If it actually leads to a lasting ceasefire, to peace in Gaza, to peace potentially between Palestinians and Israelis, we're still a very long way away from that. Netanyahu also has to try and sell this to his own government. There are right-wing members of his coalition, in the cabinet in particular, who will not be happy about any idea that potentially Hamas would remain in power, or that Hamas would retain any weapons, or that Israeli forces would totally withdraw from Gaza. So there is a lot of devil in a lot of detail. So we have to wait and see. But this in and of itself, of course, is going to be huge for Israelis. The Hostage and Families Forum have already put out a message. Again, slightly cautious. They're thanking President Trump, but they're also saying they want to wait and see for this to happen. There have been a lot of false dawns for a lot of people. And for Gazans, I think they'll be just left asking the question, what does this mean for them? Does this mean that the bombing will truly end, that there will be development, that they'll be allowed to go back to their homes? And crucially, will there be enough food to eat? Will this aid start to flow again? So many, many unanswered questions. But nevertheless, President Trump, through sheer force of will, seems to have made this happen. Again, if you look at the Hamas statement that we got, that then triggered this series of events. This was the Hamas response to President Trump's 20-point peace proposal. Well, at first blush, there were no surprises there. It was, yes, we agree to release the hostages, but there were a whole list of yes, but, which is what we expected. But it's almost like President Trump had his own sense of reality, saying, well, they just agreed to release all the hostages. And such is the strength of his character and his ability to influence allies in the Middle East and elsewhere, that he has got this coalition together to get to this point where they're going to agree on phase one, something that President Trump absolutely said. But just one final point on this question of, is this it or is there something more? Again, Donald Trump has said repeatedly that this isn't an isolated deal. This is one part of a wider process of Middle East peace, expanding the Abraham Accords. And if that's his aim, then there has to be more than just hostage release inside Gaza.
You can certainly assume that the Trump administration will count this among the promises made, promises kept category. And as you say, Ian, still a lot of devil in the details. Thank you so much, Ian Pannell. Martha Raddatz joins us now. Martha, of course, you've been in Israel a number of times in the 2 years since October 7th of 2023. And even on that makeshift pier near Gaza, what's going through your mind as you hear of this news along with the rest of us?
Well, certainly, Linsey, the devil is in the details, but this is a remarkable achievement if they can get all those hostages released. And President Trump certainly does deserve credit for that. The families of the abductees have said they are excited, anticipatory, and apprehensive about this deal, but they thanked President Trump effusively and said that up to Donald Trump, we thank him for his leadership and determination that led to a historic breakthrough, an end to the war, and a comprehensive agreement to return all abductees. It is remarkable. It is one day after the massacre in Israel, 2 years, and one day after the massacre in Israel. Just yesterday, Linsey, I spoke to the brother of twin 28-year-old men who have been held during those 2 years. I met him last year at Kfar Aza, where those men were taken. Liron Berman, I think some of us are familiar with him. I saw him here in Washington, D.C. He continues to make the case like the other hostage families. He had said just the other night in Tel Aviv, when a possible ceasefire would be reached, that he was filled somewhere suspended between dread and hope. Yesterday, when I saw him, he was more hopeful because he knew these meetings were beginning to take place. But those brothers of his, Gil and Zev and Gali Berman, 2 years, they were dragged from their homes. They have had proof of life. One of the freed hostages said he saw both of them while he was in captivity. They had been separated. They were injured. One other thing we have to think about is the condition of those hostages, how long it will take to gather them, but a remarkable achievement, even getting those hostages released, if they can get those hostages released. And I have to say, I do not think President Trump would put out a truth social like this unless he truly believed this was going to happen and that Israel would withdraw some troops at the line they decided on. Linsey.
And Martha, just stay with us for a moment. We have a message from the family's headquarters for the return of the abductees. The families say that they received the news of the signing of the agreement to return all 48 abductees and the abductee with excitement, anticipation, and apprehension. They go on to say, but our struggle is not over and will not end until the last abductee returns. They go on later to say there are 48 kidnapped men and women in Hamas captivity. Our moral and national obligation is to return them all home, both living and dead. We will not rest or be silent until the last kidnapped person is returned. We've been talking about the relief of the families of the hostages and the credit that many have given to President Trump. You can remember, Martha, you and I were there during the inauguration of President Trump for his second term, and he brought many of the hostage families up to the front right after his inauguration, shortly thereafter. Have you heard from some of the families that this kind of deal would not happen but for President Trump?
Oh, again and again, Linsey. I mean, they are very thankful to President Trump for the attention he has given this, for his motivation to have this war end and to bring those hostages home, and the pressure he has put on both sides. And that eventually led to this, and sending Jared Kushner over there and Steve Witkoff and multiple trips over there by Steve Witkoff, by others, to try to get to this point. Again, there is much to be worked out. This is the first phase of a 20-point plan that leaves a lot of work, but getting those hostages released is a very, very big deal.
To say the least. All right, Martha Raddatz, our thanks to you. I want to bring in our ABC News national security and defense analyst, Mick Mulroy. Mick, what are the biggest hurdles to getting this deal?
So, Linsey, first of all, this is absolutely great news for the people of Israel, obviously, the hostages and their families, and for the people of Gaza. This should be an end to the fighting, at least temporarily and hopefully permanently, but also a major increase in humanitarian aid, 600 trucks per day, according to the 20-point plan. The biggest hurdles, of course, are the disarming of Hamas and the withdrawal of the IDF, so the Israeli Defense Forces. Starting with the major population centers, then to the border, and then eventually, of course, outside of Gaza. And that's going to be a very orchestrated event because it's tied together. So that is the sticking issue. But just getting this started should help build momentum to get that to happen. That also would lead to a multinational stabilization force that could come in and replace the security that would be left when the IDF withdrew, so the vacuum that would be created. So there's a lot to go in this 20-point plan, but this is a huge step forward in making all of it happen.
And I do just hold on with us for one moment. I want to give a statement here from Hamas. They released a statement, a lengthy statement, but in summation, they said that they have reached an agreement stipulating an end to the war on Gaza, Israeli forces withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the entry of aid, and a prisoner exchange. And a quick note here from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who released the following statement in English saying, "With God's help, we will bring this all home." Mick, just have to ask, what's the difference, do you think? It feels like we were to this moment, almost to this point, on several occasions. There was hope that there was going to be a deal that was reached. What do you think the difference is now? What made the biggest difference?
I think there was two parts, Linsey. One was putting this coalition of individuals together that put maximum pressure, not only on Hamas through Qatar and Egypt, for example, but also the United States putting pressure on Israel, specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, to get him to accept the agreement when he was at the White House. I think those were also key. The other part was Hamas was almost on their last leg. So with the assault that was done in Gaza City, they could see the end coming. So this was not just them trying to help the people of Gaza. This was also them trying to help themselves from complete annihilation. So I think the pressure that the IDF put on Hamas, plus the pressure, the political pressure that was really orchestrated by the United States, came to this conclusion, which hopefully is a ceasefire with the hostages being released and humanitarian aid coming in large amounts, which of course could lead to the remaining part of the 20-point plan.
And I want to read a little excerpt more from the Hamas statement, because this is very significant. It says, "We highly appreciate the efforts of our mediating brothers in Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. We also value the efforts of U.S. President Donald Trump. We seek to bring about a definitive end to the war and a complete withdrawal of the occupation from the Gaza Strip. We call on President Trump and international parties to compel the occupation government to fully implement the agreement's requirements." How concerned are you that this could still fall apart?
Well, we should all be concerned, but this is certainly the most optimistic we've seen, and with gaining momentum toward the rest of the plan. The rest of the plan would result in a complete IDF withdrawal. It would result in a Palestinian government that was filled with technocrats that are focused more on governing and the goodwill of the Palestinian people in Gaza, vice constantly being at war with their neighbor in the sense of Hamas. And it would be a stabilization force for the rest of the region. Part of the plan does include the expansion of the Abraham Accords, so the normalization with Israel and other countries like Saudi Arabia. All this could happen, and it's a huge benefit to both Israel and the Palestinian people in Gaza and, of course, the West Bank. So if it happens, that would be a major breakthrough in the Middle East stabilization and peace process that certainly would be welcomed by all the aforementioned countries that played such a big part in getting this to happen.
And before we let you go, Mick, again, interesting that Hamas did single out how much they value President Donald Trump in these negotiations. How significant a role do you feel that he played in order to get us to this point?
I think the president personally played a significant role. Obviously, he had mediators working for him to get this done. But his personal relationship with all these countries' leaders, whether it's Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and of course Israel, he has a lot of influence not only on the political leadership in Israel, but the Israeli people. And I think that all came to play into seeing this happen. And now we should all hope that it holds, that these hostages are released, that food aid comes in large quantities, and that we move further down this process that would lead potentially to a permanent peace in the Middle East.
Mick Mulroy, thank you so much for joining us on this rather momentous occasion. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang. And Selena, as we heard Ian Pannell say, it seems by sheer force of will that President Trump helped to get this deal over the finish line. What are you hearing from your sources regarding the president's role in getting both parties to sign off on the first phase, at least, of this peace plan?
Well, Lindsay, we know that the president has been deeply involved in this on a personal level. He had been putting significant pressure on Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to sign off on this, to get this done. The president also, of course, thanking all of the mediators involved, including Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. But look, this is the first phase. And what we're hearing from U.S. officials is that these negotiations have really been focused on what's going to be happening in the initial few days, the initial few weeks of this deal. The president announcing this means all of the hostages will be released soon, that Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as their first step, saying that all parties will be treated fairly. But again, still a lot of questions we don't know around the timing and the bigger picture and the longer term view of what this means. But Lindsay, it was really quite stunning that we saw some of the drama unfolding on live TV before we got this announcement. Just a few hours ago, the president was at a White House event. Secretary of State Marco Rubio handed the president a note. You can see it right there. The president reading that note, and then he read out loud that he was just told that we are close to a deal in the Middle East. The president also saying that he may travel to the Middle East very soon, in the coming days even.
And we've talked about Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, of course, President Trump's son-in-law. Give us a sense of who exactly was part of the U.S. delegation and how their role was so important in this part.
Yeah, they both played a very key role in this. And you also remember that Jared Kushner is also the former advisor to the president in that region. And Steve Witkoff is very close to the president, serving as a special envoy. They've been serving as negotiators in the region. But again, I still think there are huge questions here. And it was very clear from the president's Truth Social post on social media, where he pointed out these key issues that negotiators have been focusing on, including withdrawal from certain areas, as well as release of the hostages. But the president does not mention those thorny issues, such as the process for disarming Hamas and the future governing structure of Gaza. That still, it appears, needs to be negotiated. But what we are seeing here is certainly a breakthrough, though, to your point, Lindsay, we have been at this moment time and time again before.
Perhaps this one feels a little bit different. Selena Wang, our thanks to you. And for those of you who are just joining us, President Trump has announced the first phase of the Israel-Hamas peace plan. Trump posted on Truth Social, "I'm very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed-upon line as the first steps toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers." This came after today at the White House. President Trump was handed a note from Secretary of State Marco Rubio about a potential peace deal between Israel and Hamas. That note said that they need the president to approve a social media post so that he could announce this first. Here's what Trump had to say about this after he was handed that note.
I was just given a note by the Secretary of State saying that we're very close to a deal in the Middle East, and they're going to need me pretty quickly.
Hamas has released a statement saying, in part, we highly appreciate the efforts of our mediating brothers in Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. We also value the efforts of U.S. President Donald Trump, who seek to bring about a definitive end to the war and complete withdrawal of the occupation from the Gaza Strip. The families of hostages also released a statement saying the families of the abductees would like to express their deep gratitude to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his team for the leadership and determination that led to a historic breakthrough and end to the war and a comprehensive agreement to return all abductees. We will not rest or be silent until the last kidnapped person is returned. We do have a statement now, a more fulsome statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, saying, a big day for Israel. Tomorrow I will convene the government to approve the agreement and bring all of our dear hostages home. I thank the heroic IDF soldiers and all the security forces. Thanks to their courage and sacrifice, we have reached this day. I thank from the bottom of my heart President Trump and his team for their dedication to his sacred mission of freeing our hostages. With God's help, together, we will continue to achieve all of our goals and expand peace with our neighbors. I want to bring in ABC News military analyst Colonel Steve Ganyard. Steve, this is a 20-point plan that's being agreed upon. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been under a lot of pressure from his right flank to have a peace deal, or to never have a peace deal with Hamas. What perhaps changed, do you think, in his calculations?
Well, I think, Lindsay, that Hamas saw that it was inevitable that the IDF, the Israelis, would take all of Gaza. They said, we will go in and we will conquer all of Gaza, and it'll take us till about the end of the year. So really, Hamas didn't have much of a choice here. Now, they may have saved some face. Who knows? Maybe there's a backroom deal to allow some of the Hamas leaders get on a boat and escape offshore. But really, this was inevitable. And so Hamas is making, it's a Hobson's choice here. There really is no choice at all. And so Hamas chose what preserved at least a little bit of face here. But I think what's interesting, Lindsay, is we've been talking a little bit about, who knows what's going to happen, the devil's in the details. But let's think about what the day after looks like. So there are big things that need to be taken care of. Security. Who's going to do security? What countries are going to come in and establish security within Gaza? We know that the Israelis are going to set up a perimeter, a sort of a DMZ around Gaza itself. The Israelis will not abide by having anybody from Hamas run the country. So security is an issue. There's no any kind of police or fire or water. All these things need to be reconstituted. That gets to who pays for it. In this case, we probably think it'll be the Gulf countries, the Saudis, the Qataris, UAE, are all going to pay the hundreds of billions of dollars it will take to make Gaza a functioning city again, a city-state again. One final thought, Lindsay. Think about October 7th and what it's done to change the future of the Middle East. Everything has changed in unimaginable ways. On October 6th, we would have never imagined that Hezbollah would be destroyed in Lebanon, that Assad would be out of Syria, that the Iranians would be neutered, and most of their surrogates have been neutered as well. Think about what's going to happen, the potential here, and this is a very optimistic look. Think about the potential. If the Abraham Accords are signed, you'll have all of Sunni Islam in a peace deal with the Israelis. Think about what that means for the region. Think about what it means for the world. If we take an optimistic look here, and yes, there'll be fits and starts, this could be the beginning of a new era of peace and prosperity in the Middle East.
Well, that is certainly a promising and hopeful thought. Steve, I want to ask you this, though. If it's not Hamas, who are the Palestinian technocrats, as Hamas refers to them? Who will manage the rebuilding of Gaza and first and foremost at this moment, the delivery of aid?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't know that there are any technocrats. The technocrats within Gaza, at least, they'll have to bring in outside technocrats. And again, I think the president has made this clear. Like, this is not going to be America's problem. He's going to be the chairman of the board that will take care of the future of Gaza. But the contributions in both boots on the ground and money are going to come from the countries within the region. President's made it clear we're not putting American boots on the ground, so who is going to run these countries? It'll have to be people that will be brought in from the outside, and it will take time. It will be a massive humanitarian effort to get not just aid go back in, but as we talked about, the redeveloping and reestablishing basic services, water, hospitals, sewage, all those things, power, those things need to be reestablished, and the whole city-state needs to be rebuilt.
And Steve, Israel has been, of course, bombing Gaza relentlessly, even until today. They will remain wary of Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza. One imagines that Israel will be keeping a very close eye on activity of any militants in Gaza.
Yeah, Netanyahu's obviously going to get pushback from those on his right within his coalition who don't like any part of Hamas having any say in the future of Gaza. So I think it'll be, we'll have to watch very closely to see who's put in place, because it's going to have to be sort of, the people are going to be agreed on by a committee, and President Trump's going to run that committee, and the Israelis will have a say. But if all the Israeli hostages come out, then Israel's leverage in these negotiations is diminished, and they will have to take a little bit more of President Trump's guidance than they would have in the past. Hostages come home, the bodies of those who were killed during the while they were in captivity come back, and the beginning of reestablishing something with the Israelis being a bit on the outside watching, but they will definitely make sure that no part of Hamas has a role in the future of Gaza.
Steve Ganyard for us. Thanks so much, Steve. Ian Pannell joins us now, also from Israel. And Ian, we've just learned that Netanyahu and Trump will speak by phone soon. Just talk about, again, just the magnitude of this moment.
I mean, this is enormous. I was in Gaza in 2014 during one of the many open conflicts that have taken place, with Israeli forces coming in with extensive bombing. And we've seen this time and again. And Hamas was allowed to continue to rebuild. It had rockets, it fired them at Israel, and then it launched what was the most audacious attack. But Steve is right, the entire shape of the Middle East has changed. And, you know, when we stand back and judge the historic nature of what is happening now, it will be seen as one of the most tumultuous, significant periods in recent Middle Eastern history. The entire shape of the region has changed. I think all depends, in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, on how this proceeds. I mean, Hamas have released a statement saying that this is about a lasting peace and the withdrawal of Israeli forces. For most people's minds, especially here in Israel and you know, where you are in the US, Hamas can't continue to exist. So what replaces it? What kind of government do you have? And what kind of guarantees can you give to the Palestinians that, okay, you can deliver the aid, but what kind of lasting peace, what kind of lasting development, what kind of meaningful government can you actually have in the region? And can you have a viable state? I think for many people, they will argue that the only way to guarantee peace for Israel is to have a viable Palestinian state, the so-called two-state solution. But that has to be done in a way whereby you don't just hand over power, you hand over power to a government that is competent. And because of the domination of Hamas and Fatah in the West Bank for so many years, there isn't that government in waiting. But make no mistake, it looks like President Trump has actually pulled off something here that many presidents before him have failed to do. The last time we got close to some kind of significant agreement, it was Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat. And Yasser Arafat walked away from that deal that potentially would have given the Palestinians a significant state. So I think if this leads to something like a viable independent Palestinian state, then that will have been the crowning achievement, arguably, of President Trump's presidency. Bringing together this coalition, I think, is significant. And again, we've just got to wait and see the details. this has to be more than just the release of some Palestinian prisoners and the remaining 48 hostages. As important as that obviously is to everyone here in Israel and to the families of the Palestinian prisoners, it's got to be something more meaningful than that.
Ian, I want to just go back in time for a moment. Less than 5 months ago in May, Netanyahu said there is no way Israel will halt its war in Gaza, even if a deal is reached to release more hostages. Now here we are tonight, and Netanyahu saying the government will convene Thursday to try to ratify this ceasefire. Do we have any idea why the about face in again, less than 5 months' time?
If you talk to people in the region, a kind of key moment was the failed bombing in Qatar, where Israel tried to take out the Hamas delegation, the very delegation who've just about to sign this agreement now in Sharm el-Sheikh. The feeling is that there was outrage. Outrage, of course, from Qatar, but also from the United States. So there was overreach by Prime Minister Netanyahu, that they made this claim that they could go after Hamas wherever they were, but going after them in Qatar like that proved to be entirely counterproductive. They failed to get the senior delegates who they'd gone after. Instead, they killed a Qatari security guard, some Hamas bodyguards, the son of one of the senior negotiators, and that triggered a series of events that led to Netanyahu having to agree to go along with this 20-point peace plan. You remember, Netanyahu went to New York, where you are, to the UN General Assembly. President Trump there met with key Arab leaders, as well as the president of Turkey, the Pakistanis, and they all agreed on a way forward, and Netanyahu was essentially forced to go along with it. And if you listen to him speak, he's kind of changed his tune from what you quoted 5 months ago. He's now presenting himself as a peacemaker. He's also had to appease the right-wing elements within his own cabinet, who have been absolutely adamant that Israel should continue the war. They're looking at establishing settlements, looking at a continued Israeli presence inside Gaza. And we were talking about that only months ago, that Israel would totally occupy all of Gaza. Well, that now appears to be not the case at all. We'll be looking at an Israeli withdrawal. We'll look at Gaza being run by a body that will not involve Israel, Israeli forces having to pull back. So it will be presented as a win for Netanyahu. I'm not so sure it will. But, there's also been a growing movement here in Israel against this war. We saw 200,000 people out on the streets. This is only a small country of Tel Aviv and also in Jerusalem, calling for an end to the war as well as the release of hostages. Of course, Palestinians are exhausted and want an end to the war, but so are Israelis. And the other key factor is the growing starvation. Those terrible, searing images from inside Gaza of children dying because they don't have enough to eat were seen and consumed and had an impact on people around the world. Again, just look at last weekend. In Amsterdam alone, you had some 30% of the population came out on the street. And you had a whole host of governments, like the British government, like the French government, who had to recognize the Palestinian state, even though one doesn't actually exist, because their domestic constituency were downright angry. They were demanding change. They were demanding pressure. And Israel's allies, one by one, started to fall away. There was a commentary in one of the papers here where it referred to Israel as a leper state. Ask any Israeli here, they'll tell you they know what it's like to be abroad and be an Israeli. And there's a real sense that this had to end, that enough was enough. We all saw the destruction, we saw the starvation, that it had to stop.
Ian, panel, our thanks to you. And of course, we did just talk to Rachel Goldberg-Polin yesterday, the mother of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, who was one of the hostages who ultimately lost his life in Hamas captivity. And she said to us just yesterday, on the 2-year anniversary of October 7th, that more than 80% of the people in Israel just want peace and just want this to be over. And so here we are at this point. It seems that that wish has come true for at least 80% of that country and certainly beyond. And joining us now is Selena Wang once again. Selena, we heard Ian Panel say that it seems to be once again the credit of President Trump that he was able to get this deal over the finish line. What are you hearing from your sources?
Well, we know that the president has played a very personal role in all of these negotiations, putting a significant amount of pressure on Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to this deal. And I want to read to you, actually, I'm just getting some information from a senior White House official on the timing on all of this. This official is telling me that the deal goes to the Israeli cabinet tomorrow. Once they vote yes, Israel has to withdraw to the line, which should take under 24 hours. Then the 72-hour clock begins, and Hamas will try to go earlier if possible. This White House official telling me that their assessment is that the hostages will begin getting released on Monday. So this is all moving pretty quickly. We know that the president, from his social media post, said that this plan means all the hostages will be released very soon. Israel will withdraw their troops to the agreed upon line, saying all the parties will be treated fairly. So we're now getting a little bit more of a timeline on all of that, Linsey. But as you've been talking about with Ian and the other experts over the last hour, still big questions remaining about what happens after these initial days, these initial weeks, about the long-term plan.
Certainly, that looms large. Give us a sense of who was involved. We heard at the end, or we read at the end of President Trump's Truth Social post, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Who were the peacemakers, at least as it refers to, as we're talking about the U.S. delegation, at least?
Yeah, well, first of all, the president has given thanks to the mediators, which includes Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. When it comes to the U.S. delegation, Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, he's in the region, along with Jared Kushner, who is the president's son-in-law and the president's former advisor in the region. So they've been playing a critical role there in those talks with those mediators. But look, the president, of course, though, he himself has also been putting the pressure on. And what was really dramatic, Linsey, is that we saw the drama unfolding leading up to this moment on live television. The president was at a White House event. Then his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, entered the room, handed the president a piece of paper. The president read it. You can see it right there. The president reading that note from the Secretary of State saying that they are very close to a deal. And the president also saying that he may also travel to the region very soon, within the coming days even, potentially. But look, the president today, he did not touch on those thornier issues, including the process for disarming Hamas, the future governing structure of Gaza, all of that still unclear. What we're hearing from U.S. officials, though, is that the negotiations have really been focused on these next few days, these next few weeks.
And reports from the White House now that hostage release could begin as early as Monday. Thank you so much. I want to bring in Marcus Moore. He joins us again from Tel Aviv. Marcus, just let's talk one more time about the significance of this agreement, of this moment.
Well, really, Linsey, you can't really overstate the significance of this after 2 years of war and everything that we've noted. Really, the coalition that was formed and all of the consensus and the agreement that we now see has led to what we understand is an agreement on the first phase of this ceasefire. But it is just the first phase. And just to recap what we know that this does call for the immediate release of the hostages, 48 of them still in captivity, and Linsey, 20 are still believed to be alive. So word of this will certainly be encouraging to the families who have been hoping and praying for some ceasefire and a hostage exchange. And at the same time, it also calls for the withdrawal of Israeli troops to an agreed upon line. But tonight, Linsey, we don't know the specifics on that. We don't know the details of how this is going to play out, where those Israeli troops are going to go, and really how all of this is going to work. But the fact that there is an agreement and that this could potentially, perhaps does signal perhaps the beginning of the end of this war, that is hugely significant. But as the president has pointed out, he said that this is not only a deal to secure the release of the remaining hostages, but also a ceasefire in Gaza. But he says that this is potentially a step towards peace and agreement across the entire region. And so really speaking to how this is not only something that will impact the scores of families in Gaza, but the millions of people across the region. And we can't forget, Linsey, about really the suffering that so many have, that they're still enduring as I speak to you now in Gaza. This war that started on October 7th has resulted in the deaths of more than 67,000 people in Gaza. Those families who have been fighting and suffering to try to get food to survive from day to day. And so as we talk about this ceasefire agreement and what it could mean for the region, for those families who are there right now, it means survival for them and potentially access to more food as those aid routes are reopened. Linsey.
Marcus Moore from Israel for us. Thank you so much, Marcus. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. I said it earlier tonight. I can think it's safe to say that the Trump administration will be putting in this under the promises made, promises kept category.
You can absolutely bet that. The president describing this as a great day. And of course, remember, we are exactly 2 years and 1 day after the October 7th attack. The president announcing this first phase, as he described it, of this deal, which, as we've been discussing, means that Hamas will release all of the remaining hostages, though we don't know when. The president, though, saying very soon. I was just told that the White House expects that hostages could begin to be released as soon as Monday, Linsey. And of course, in exchange, Israel is agreeing to withdraw their troops to that agreed upon line as the first steps towards what President Trump is now describing as a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. Of course, we have also been hearing from the hostage families who are welcoming this, what they describe in a statement as excitement, anticipation, and apprehension. Again, there are a lot of questions about how this is going to play out, what comes next. This is just the first phase. What is phase 2 and 3 and beyond? And also just when does this all play out? The president, we know earlier today, said that he could be traveling to the Middle East this weekend and saying he could be making the rounds, meaning that he could be going to Israel, and the president also not ruling out possibly even going to Gaza, Linsey.
This is certainly a momentous occasion for the entire world, but no doubt significant for President Trump. Are you hearing that from the White House? How this is something that obviously when he was even campaigning, when he was running for president, he said that he would end the war in Gaza.
Yeah, they certainly are very thrilled here. It's something that they have been working very hard on. Of course, we know that the president's envoy, Steve Witkoff, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, have been helping to negotiate this in the Middle East. The president, of course, also thanking our Middle East allies, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, who have been helping to facilitate and negotiate this important first step towards peace. But there is no doubt that this is a win for this administration and for President Trump.
Mary Bruce for us from the White House. Mary, thanks so much. Let's bring back in ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy. Mick, what are you anticipating, or what would you be listening for in the conversation, that phone call that is expected to happen any time at this point between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu?
So, of course, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu got a lot of pressure from President Trump during his visit to the White House to accept this deal. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion about how the president is really appreciative of that. He'll probably highlight how important it is for Israel and how his 20-point plan is a big benefit for Israel in the long run. It could stabilize the region. It could normalize relationships between Israel and all the Sunni Arab countries. So an expansion of the Abraham Accords. I think President Trump will probably focus on all the positives. And there isn't any real negatives other than they have to see how Hamas disarms itself and then essentially turns over any semblance of control to this new interim government that's going to be led apparently by Palestinian technocrats. So people that are very good at certain elements of society, health, education, infrastructure, if you will, and much less interested in fighting their neighbor, Israel. So I think that's going to be part of the discussion. And then they might go, even though these are two, heads of state, they might get into a little bit of the details because there's going to have to be a very closely orchestrated release of hostages. for Israeli hostages. And of course, the Palestinian prisoners need to be released. And we need to see the IDF move to this line that they've agreed to. And then we're going to have to see Hamas start disarming. So there's a lot of parts to this 20-point plan that need to happen up front, with the president's call in the first phase, to get into the second phase, which is complicated. But if the first phase can happen, I think it'll certainly build a feeling of confidence that the remaining parts could also happen.
And we're hearing that that conversation actually just took place between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It was categorized as an emotional, warm conversation as they were congratulating each other. What are you going to be watching for in particular in the next few days? And what do you see as potential obstacles?
So I hope it would not disrupt the actual process, but there's a lot of armed groups in Gaza. Some of them might decide that they didn't agree to this agreement that Hamas signed on to. So they might attack the IDF while they withdraw, and you could see a back and forth, a tick for tack combat operations still continue. But as long as it goes forward and it's only defensive, and the IDF is starting to withdraw, which I think they will, I think that should be okay. But I don't want to get people too worked up if they see some kind of skirmishes that happen between the IDF and these other armed groups. There simply isn't any control from the Hamas Palestinian side. But ultimately, if this happens, the hostages are released and the Palestinian prisoners do get returned. And of course, there's 600 trucks. That's what's in the actual agreement. 600 trucks per day, which was what the UN deemed necessary to sustain this 2 million person population in Gaza, starts coming in. Then I think you'll see the tensions come down substantially. Obviously, the fighting will have stopped. That will help as well. And then we can start talking about the long-term parts of this plan that need to happen. But this first step is so critical to all of this, and I think that's what we'll be looking for. Hopefully we see hostages start coming back out on Monday. And the Israeli population, if the polls that I saw are correct, 70% supported this plan. So there's a lot of pressure internally, not just from the United States on the Israeli government, but internally on the Israeli government to make sure this happens and goes forward. So I think this is in a very good spot. That's why there was so much optimism on every side. And this was a monumental achievement, and hopefully it leads to a significant peace in the Middle East.
Monumental for sure. Mick Mulroy, our thanks to you. Much more when we come back. Stay with us.
The news never stops.
From Tampa, we are here tonight as Hurricane Milton has just made landfall.
The surge just keeps coming up.
Right on the border between Ukraine and Russia.
We're in artillery position about 2 miles away from Gaza.
And ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
We're not far from where this rally took place, so just stick with us here.
Traveling with the president to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Here in London today.
Off the coast of Gaza.
Downtown Tel Aviv, rockets or missiles coming in.
From the most devastating disaster in Hawaii. Some areas are still smoldering.
Wherever the story.
From the front lines,
the ruins of Rafah.
From the FBI.
Reporting from Capitol Hill.
In western Portugal.
Outside of Mexico City.
In Iceland. Let's go.
Here in France.
The eclipse across America.
Just stunning.
Unbelievable.
Streaming live to you.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
You're streaming.
ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere because the news never stops.
We form a bond stronger than blood because ours is a family forged in fire.
We have a major storm heading towards Nashville.
911, what's your emergency?
We need to get people evacuated now!
All right, 113. We are on the move.
There was the doctor, the loving husband, the incredible stepfather, and then there's this monster. There was a bombshell. Someone found a hidden camera in the bathroom. 3,000 videos, 1,400 photos. This betrayal was terrifying.
He wanted to kill my son.
Once I tell the police what I have to say, he'll never get out.
Betrayal Under His Eye. Only on Hulu.
The ruby slippers are the most famous shoes in the world.
What would the shoes be worth today?
A lot.
The shoes were stolen.
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 We worked together with the FBI.
Heaven only knows how many feet went into that pair of shoes.
There is more to this than anybody realizes.
Who knows where this is going to lead?
It's gonna get real.
ABC's Nightline, the stories that shape your world, that shape your life. Dramatic, stunning, empowering, life-changing. For 45 years, the most powerful stories of our time.
This is Nightline.
Wherever the story is, Nightline will take you there. Just because it's late night doesn't mean you should be in the dark. For a brighter take on the day, this is ABC's Nightline. Late night on ABC.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Linsey Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. President Trump has announced the first phase of the Israel-Hamas peace plan. Trump posted on Truth Social, "I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed-upon line as the first step toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers." This came after today at the White House. President Trump was handed a note from Secretary of State Marco Rubio about a potential peace deal between Israel and Hamas. That note said that they need the president to approve a social media post so he can announce first. Here's what Trump had to say about this after he was handed that note.
I was just given a note by the Secretary of State saying that we're very close to a deal in the Middle East, and they're going to need me pretty quickly. So we'll take a couple of more questions.
Hamas has released a statement saying, in part, "We highly appreciate the efforts of our mediating brothers in Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. We also value the efforts of U.S. President Donald Trump, who seek to bring about a definitive end to the war and a complete withdrawal of the occupation from the Gaza Strip." The families of the hostages also released a statement saying, in part, the families of the abductees would like to express their deep gratitude to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his team for the leadership and determination that led to a historic breakthrough, an end to the war, and a comprehensive agreement to return all abductees. We will not rest or be silent until the last kidnapped person is returned. And just a short time ago, President Trump and Netanyahu spoke by phone, congratulating each other on the, quote, historic achievement. Our Marcus Moore joins us once again from Tel Aviv. Marcus, let's just talk again about the significance of this agreement, this really momentous occasion.
Yeah, Linsey, very significant, certainly, not only for the region, indeed, but certainly for the families whom we've met here in Israel who, since this war began and their loved ones were kidnapped, taken hostage, they have prayed for their loved ones to be returned safely. And they've also taken to the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other cities calling for leaders to make a deal and come to an agreement to secure their release and also bring about an end to this war. So for there to be a word of this agreement, not only coming from President Trump, but also Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and leaders from across the Arab world, it really is the first sign of what could perhaps be, many people feel, could be the beginning of the end of this war after 2 years. And Linsey, it has been, as you know, a very difficult time for those families here in Israel, but also for the countless families in Gaza who have struggled to survive, and the death toll now over 67,000 people. Now, when we talk about the agreement that has been apparently that's been made tonight, it has not been signed, but a word is that there has been agreement. It calls for the immediate release of the remaining hostages, 48 of them, and 20, Linsey, are believed to still be alive. It also calls for the IDF troops who are in Gaza, who have been carrying out military operations, for them to withdraw to an agreed upon line. But Linsey, at this hour, we don't know the specifics or the details of where those troops will withdraw to, and also how this exchange might happen. But certainly this is encouraging news for so many across this region and really across the globe who have been hoping and praying for some resolution.
Indeed, and we have heard from the White House that release could happen, that exchange could happen as early as Monday. So, Marcus, where do we stand in terms of Palestinian statehood? Does Israel win that fight for now? Because there remains little talk about the livelihood of that even enough dozens of countries recognized a Palestinian state at the UN's recent General Assembly session.
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly is something that will be discussed. It is certainly among the key demands of Hamas and others across the region. And as you noted, several countries across the globe now recognize Palestine. And so I think the focus right now is getting the first phase of this going, and that is what has been agreed upon. In terms of what happens in the days ahead, those are the details that will certainly be a part of very impassioned and deep discussions and negotiations. But that's later on down the road, right? But certainly it is a key demand and a key issue that will have to be addressed. And certainly when you consider the pressure that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been under domestically, here internally, members of his own government who certainly say that there cannot be a Palestinian state. And so certainly here internally, the Prime Minister will have time now to approach that subject, and it won't be an easy one, as you well know. But I think at this hour, it's important to remember that what we are talking about, this agreement, is only on the first phase.
Marcus Moore for us in Tel Aviv. Marcus, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang, joins us now. Selena, we've heard it again and again from a number of people today, really giving credit to President Trump for getting this deal over the finish line. What are you hearing from your sources with regard to President Trump's role in getting both parties to sign off on at least the first phase of this peace plan?
Well, certainly this is an enormous moment for the world, but also for this administration, a big win for the president, who has been very personally involved in this, Linsey. He had been really putting the pressure on Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu to sign off on this deal. And you spoke about how the two leaders just spoke not too long ago. It was described as an emotional and warm conversation from the Prime Minister's office. And they also congratulated each other and agreed to continue to have close conversation. But of course, the mediators of Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey also playing a critical role in bringing this together. And we're learning a little bit more from a senior White House official about what this timeline could look like. They say their assessment is that the hostages could start getting released on Monday. The senior official telling me that this deal goes to the Israeli cabinet tomorrow. Once they vote yes, Israel then has to withdraw to the line, which they say should take under 24 hours. Then they say the 72-hour clock begins. They said Hamas will try to go earlier if possible, and then they expect Monday is when those hostages will start getting released. Now, the president today also said that he may travel to the Middle East himself as well in the coming days. He didn't even rule out potentially going to Gaza as well, Linsey.
Selena Wang for us. Thanks so much, Selena. Joining us now is Greg Roman, the executive director of the Middle East Forum. Thank you so much for joining us. First, just give us your initial reaction to hearing this news of the agreement.
I think there's a great degree of elation which is taking place here in Israel tonight. 3 a.m. with social media feeds of all the families of the soon-to-be released hostages exploding with joy. And there's a point right now where 2 years have gone by, 2 years in one day, for them to finally receive news of their loved ones returning home. But there is definitely danger brewing on the horizon after this exchange of 20 alive hostages, 28 bodies, and unfortunately, 1,700 Palestinian terrorists who have been convicted for not just small petty crimes, but masterminds behind suicide bombings, those responsible for mass casualty attacks. And I think what we're seeing here is, while it's important to release the hostages, you also have a new wave of leadership that will be replenishing Hamas's ranks with the exchange to take place this weekend.
You talked about people there waking up in Israel to this news of a deal. What kinds of commentary are you hearing?
There's just happiness across the board. There have been families who have been waiting for this, advocating for their release in Brussels, in Washington, D.C., in Jerusalem, hundreds of thousands of individuals on the streets trying to be able to plead for their loved ones to be able to be freed after that horrendous event that took place 2 years ago. But there's also whispers in the cabinet halls, there's discussions in the National Security Council, and also in the halls of the General Staff of the Kiryat, which is equivalent to Israel's Pentagon, saying that they're not sure how this is going to affect Hamas, where the aims of the war were to destroy the organization. And unfortunately, it looks like they're going to live another day.
You mentioned your concerns about those Palestinians who will be released, the prisoners in this exchange. What makes you confident, or what might give you hope that this deal can lead to lasting peace in the region?
Well, I think it's sort of a two-sided coin. On one hand, you have Turkey and Qatar, countries that host Hamas's military and political wings, present at the negotiating table. And if I can have trust in President Trump, which I do as it relates to this deal, this is only phase one. The second phase is supposed to disarm Hamas, and the third is to excise them from the Gaza Strip. Now, this may be a play for these two countries to help Hamas disarm and to become part of the regular Palestinian political umbrella. But on the other hand, these two countries have also facilitated attacks from their soil on Israeli and American citizens, both in Israel and other areas across the region. So the other side of that coin is that those two countries were at the negotiating table, not to help Hamas move towards disarmament, but to help them live another day.
I was asking you really about the long term. Now I want to reverse that question and ask about the short term as we're looking at the rubble that primarily remains in Gaza, the desperate need for food and health care there. How do the next few days, weeks, and months play out, especially with the angst still between two countries right next to each other, two plots of land, I should say, right next to each other?
So there's an extensive Israeli body of knowledge as it relates to the civil governance of the Gaza Strip, and also to that of the international community, whether it deals with wastewater issues, the provision of food, electricity, heating oil, especially as we come to the winter months. I think there'll be a ready team on the Israeli side to facilitate whatever it agrees to as it relates to not just making sure that rubble is removed from the Gaza Strip, but so that reconstruction begins as soon as possible. And of course, it'll be predicated on the idea that Hamas won't be part of that equation. But Tony Blair, who was a key part of peacemaking efforts during the Obama and Trump administrations over 12 years, in line with the Blair Center for Peace, and also many other UN agencies, will be ready to get to work on day one. But again, that is only with the idea that Hamas will disavow violence. I think there's hope for Gaza. There's radical pragmatism, which is on the ground there right now for the people to be able to live a day without having to fight against Israel, but to focus on their own future and to look forward to a potential peace between a state of Gaza and a state of Israel. Like you said beforehand, it's a long way away.
Greg Roman, we thank you so much for your time and insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And of course, we're going to stay on top of this developing story, but we do go to other major news tonight. A 29-year-old Uber driver is under arrest, accused of setting the blaze that led to the Palisades fire in California and killed 12 people, destroyed thousands of homes and businesses. ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gutman has the very latest.
Tonight, authorities say a 29-year-old Uber driver is responsible for the historic Palisades fire that killed 12 people, destroyed more than 6,800 homes and businesses, and burned more than 37 square miles. Authorities arresting 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht overnight.
We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he intentionally started this fire.
Authorities say Rinderknecht was in Pacific Palisades on New Year's Eve working as an Uber driver when he allegedly started this fire called the Lockman Fire just after midnight on January 1st. He allegedly called 911 to report it and then came back to watch the firefight. After several hours, fire authorities thought they had the Lockman Fire contained. They were wrong.
So that fire started on January 1st, and it smoldered underground for about a week until on January 7th, heavy winds caused this underground fire to surface and spread above ground, causing what became known as the Palisades Fire.
And we were there just after the Palisades fire broke out and witnessed the horror as thousands of homes quickly went up in flames.
Everything is catching fire here. Trash bins, shrubs, trees, houses. The smoke is unbearable at this point. We've just seen 4 or 5 houses go up over the past few minutes here.
Rinderknecht arrested near his current home in Melbourne, Florida. Authorities say before starting the fire, he listened to a song by a French rap artist in which the music video for the song shows the main character